times of sharing during ASEAN.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Good morning, this is Arlene.
This is Grace.
And of course, you are with us on our Durian ASEAN's ASEAN Daily, where we bring you all the latest updates on politics, economy, and society in Southeast Asia. To kickstart our discussion today, we want to put a focus on the communist Laos, where they are awaiting new leaders. Laos will unveil a new Communist Party lineup this week at a Congress expected to usher in some leadership changes. But according to a lot of people, it seems to be, business as usual. There won't be any shift in the authoritarian status quo in the country that has become one of Asia's quiet economic success story.
Just to add more information on this one, is Lao People's Revolutionary Party. That particular party has ruled for about decades, and then they will choose a party chief and also a Politburo and a central committee and improved economic target for the landlocked Southeast Asian nations for the next 5 years. And a lot of eyes are lying on Laos this year mainly because it's sharing ASEAN, but there will be a lot of coverage from media and other organizations, because having this new leader for this new Communist Party, it will sort of add more element to the government, the system in the country.
And what is interesting on the economic side of Laos is Asia's strongest growth rates. What we are seeing is it has expanded at an average of 7.8% since 2011, driving mainly by primary products like mining and also hydropower, which is one of the interesting development in Southeast Asia, the focus on renewable energy. Moreover, it has gotten a lot of foreign investment, much from communist neighboring China.
Well, that's very true. And at the same time, regarding this candidate for this leadership, no one knows and nothing has revealed yet in this country for secretive politics. But talking about 79-year-old president and a party chief, Komali Sayang-sone, is expected to retire after decades that he was in charge. So, like I mentioned before, it is still unclear that who's gonna receive the next this position as a party chief. But according to the analyst, sees the Prime Minister Thongsin Thamavong and the Vice President Buhang Voranchik among the most likely choices could happen.
And one thing that I want to highlight is some of the key infrastructure development that Laos is enjoying right now, which is China has started to invest on a $6.3 billion building of a railway, and not to mention that the US have also put their influence in Laos with the visit by Secretary of State John Kerry, and later the year Barack Obama will also become the US president to visit the country for a summit that Laos will host. And we all know that Laos is this year's chairmanship, although there's a lot of question mark whether Laos would be able to handle such an event like ASEAN Summit. But a lot of people are quite positive of it. According to a lot of analysts, the leadership has overseen incredible changes, especially in terms of resource-intensive development. So whoever that will continue the legacy of Chomali Sayason, I think it won't be a problem for them because
right.
he already laid out the foundation for Laos to move on as a country.
So hope that Laos will choose the right leader this time, and having a lot of collaboration and also working with the other nation is a very good thing, because Laos is very well known for undeveloped nation or out of all 10 nations in ASEAN, and having this chairman as a responsibility for this ASEAN this year and choosing this leader, it's got quite a lot of tasks to accomplish.
Yeah, it's a lot of tasks.
So hope that the next generation or next leader can take over this the responsibility on his or her shoulder, and to be able to lead this nation or step up to developing nations, the next step.
And one thing for sure, I think if there's one area that might be their downfall is
Right.
their human rights track record. We all know that the party that is being led by the current president is the only legal political party in
Right.
Laos. And the person in charge, Chomali Sayason, he is unfortunately more, I would say, skill as a defense minister prior to his role as the leader of Laos. So I think they might need more people or more diversity when it comes to leading, in different areas other than just defense and agriculture and also other primary sources of income. But I think when it comes to human rights, that's one thing that Laos might need to lay out the foundation as strongly as the foundation for economic progress.
Yes.
We move on to another news, which is also a news that I would say a breaking news yesterday. So we all know that U.S. President Barack Obama will be holding a meeting in the U.S. where he has invited heads of ASEAN leaders in California next month. But unfortunately, the meeting does not sit right with the Human Rights Watch, because they are slamming the U.S. president for inviting ASEAN, where they call Barack Obama to make sure that human rights are at the top of the agenda of the meeting and not just business.
Well, I would love to discuss further in this matter, because when it comes to human rights in ASEAN, yes, it's one of the biggest issue, and also it is one of the longest issue that we've been holding so far. And human rights can include so many elements there. So when it is said as a business part, that I have a big doubt in this. But however, when it charted the top of the concerns from Southeast Asian nation, yes, I can totally agree with that. As much as ASEAN can be looked as economical approach or beautifying it at the surface to look at that we are going somewhere, and also by having this AEC along the way. However, there are so many other issues that we haven't even covered properly, or it's covered but then the issues are not resolved. And one of the issues, like you mentioned, is human rights. And of course, Obama, when he wants to address this issue, there are also other groups who will definitely go against him, or will create even more problems when it comes to human rights.
That's true. And one of the claim by the New York-based rights group, which is Human Rights Watch, they say that a lot of the leaders in ASEAN countries are responsible for quote-unquote grievous human rights abuses and war crimes. I mean, I couldn't agree more, because for Human Rights Watch, they emphasize that the summit contradicts with previous U.S. policy by extending an invitation to Prime Minister Hun Sen, who carried out a coup in 1997 and has ruled abusively in Cambodia for the last 30 years.
Yep.
Also, they call on President Obama to hold sessions at the February 15 to 16 summit with leaders of civil society, just to somehow be a more inclusive meeting rather than just getting political leaders and business leaders in the same room, but to also include civil society to be the checks and balances for the meeting.
Right. And not only those countries, but when it comes to Malaysia, Indonesia, each country has issues that are related to human rights. And then a lot of hopes and wish, or even the proposal to the President Obama, that why don't we even discuss these things even further and then let governments hear directly from the leaders of civil society, human rights, and even environmental groups. And then when the platform are provided, they're really expected all these issues to be resolved and then implemented in a proper manner.
If you look at the Human Rights Watch press statement, which is titled US ASEAN Make Rights Central to Summit, you will see a string of I would say examples that they use to describe, besides Prime Minister Hun Sen, to describe why the US President Barack Obama should reconsider his invitation to ASEAN leaders. He quoted leaders not just in Cambodia but also in Vietnam, Thailand, of course, with the Prayut Chan-o-cha's military coup, and Laos have a long list of human rights violation, especially with the farmers and all.
Right.
And not to mention our Malaysia Prime Minister, where it implicated that he is in a massive corruption scandal, and of course he has also imprisoned opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim. So for Human Rights Watch, to them is really important for US President to address all these human rights issues and not just talk about forming greater relationship between countries.
Well, to add even more, you mentioned each countries and its issues, but at the same time, when it comes to human rights issue, right, relevant to the ASEAN countries, we also have this lack of free and fair elections. That's also that relates to human rights, and there is also a lot of restrictions on freedom of expression, association, and assembly, and that also goes to the abuse against the human rights defenders and other activities, women rights, political use of courts, high-level corruption, lack of protection, and so on. There, even human trafficking we've been talking about, and then the rights of the LGBT even. So those are all those elements. They're under the umbrella of human rights. So it is something that we shouldn't just hush or just be silent about it. We really need to reveal this element and to talk about it.
That's completely true. And to talk about it, that means that greater cooperation by the US government towards human rights. They are focusing on their pivot to Asia and to rebalance Asia. So I think this is the right time for the US government to do that. Let's move on to a news that is closer to Southeast Asia. Of course, the news that has never really put an end to it. I'm talking about the South China Sea. This time, there's more controversy with Vietnam objecting to the Chinese oil rigs in disputed waters of the South China Sea. In fact, the government has lashed out against the presence of a Chinese oil rig in the disputed water. This is one of the latest series of, he said, she said, she did, he did,
right,
between Beijing and the rest of Southeast Asia. And to Vietnamese, they're saying that this is a series of provocative actions by China this month.
This tension between Vietnam and China, it's affecting quite a lot of neighboring countries as well. But if you talk about these two countries' relationship, when it comes to the like I mentioned before, the tension between Vietnam and also China when it comes to South China Sea, it looks like it's not getting better. It's just going worse and worse. And with this aggressiveness that's coming from China by having their artificial buildings and marking their own territory in South China Sea, it only puts more anger in Vietnam, even surrounding countries, for example, the Philippines as well. So this rig was still about 25 miles from the assumed median line between these two countries, but it was in overlapping area between two continental shelves of Vietnam and the Hainan Island in China, which has not yet delimited yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, it's partly due to the fact that it's still a very vague area. I mean, you're talking about an area where it's just full of seas. Like,
Right.
how do you put a demarcation on it?
Exactly.
And late on Tuesday this week, that the Vietnamese foreign minister said, Hai Show 918. 981, the same rig that was at the center of the 2014 flu, has entered disputed waters in South China Sea on Saturday last week, according to a statement by the ministry. And in fact, according to a Vietnamese official who have met a Chinese embassy official on Monday this week, he registered Vietnam's concern, and it adds that China should remove the rig from the disputed waters in accordance to international law.
Right.
But I mean, the irony is, the good thing is Vietnamese official actually approached China on this. But the irony is China insisted that the rig was still in its territorial waters, and it's really hard to pinpoint because you're talking about an area where how you determine which part of the sea is yours when it's so large and it's so vast.
Maybe that's why China is targeting, because you can never define the where to market. So the more aggressive they become, there is no way that they can just step back. I'm just giving an assumption, but again, Vietnam has been constantly asking China to investigate this ramming of Vietnamese fishing vessels. It was somewhere this month, and also according to the captain of the boat, said it was marked with the Chinese characters apparently. And in recent weeks, the country Vietnam has also complained about several unannounced state-sponsored Chinese flight through Vietnamese administered airspace in South China Sea. So there are a lot of activities to Vietnam that it is unacceptable by Chinese, I would say, invasion.
But it's a childish war, I mean, if you put it in that way, because everyone is doing their own thing. They hardly communicate, but they're always making claims that, the other party is breaching the international law or the original demarcation. But I think the most vital part is not to get too caught up with this blame game,
Right.
and to focus on what's next, what's the solution that all parties could think of and work together. Still another story about Vietnam. Well, do you like turtles, Grace?
I love turtles.
Well, one turtle, which is at the age of more than 100 years old,
Wow.
has just passed away. And it's not just people who love turtle will feel sad about this. The whole of Vietnam actually are mourning the death of a sacred turtle.
Oh, no.
And in fact, they are speculating that future omens might be around the corner for the ruling Communist Party.
Wow, that also relates to the political side, which is quite interesting. At the same time, this whole party members, apparently they will meet in Hanoi for the next 8 years for their 5-yearly congress to choose the leader and meet a power battle, apparently, between the conservative and modernizing factions. And then having this news of the death of this turtle in Vietnam, like I mentioned before, a lot of people are in grief to just remembering this turtle in that nation. But it's very interesting that how this passing of this popular turtle that lived in the famous city center was viewed by many, and also it is sort of alarming omen in the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do not know what to say, because to me, Vietnam is an atheist country, and you would assume atheists would be more logical about things like omens or superstition. But in fact, when it comes to being superstitious, Vietnam is one of the most superstitious countries in Southeast Asia. They believe the death of this very honored, very dignified turtle means that something bad would happen to the communist ruling, and something like a power battle between the conservative and the modernizing factions would arise.
So it has to be sort of related or psychologically, even in one way or the other, because it is apparently a very bad news for many people in Hanoi, the city.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's been there for about 120 years, so it has lived with the history that the Vietnam holds until now. And apparently, the turtle will be preserved at the Vietnam National Museum.
Probably that's the only good news out of this.
That will be something that for people to remember for sure, and also visit the turtle in the future. But when it comes to the political side, of course, people may question outside of Vietnam that how does the death of turtle can relate to the political party. However, like we mentioned before, there are a lot of Vietnamese, they believe in a certain superstitions or the belief that the country holds. So by having this death of a living creature can bring a bad sort of a vibe or even speculations to the country.
Well, to answer your question just now, I'm not sure how to say this, but some Vietnamese actually believe it was 7th century old. That means it was 700 years old. That's crazy. But according to scientists,
For sure.
it's only 120 years old, so
Yeah.
it's not that old. But anyway, we have to take a break. When we return, we will discuss further on the societal side and also on the economic side of Southeast Asia.